Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Alan. The sound of a key turning in a lock at 3 in the morning should be comforting when it's your fiancée coming home from where she told you she went to. Instead, it became the soundtrack to the worst night of my life that would end our engagement 4 months before we were supposed to say I do. Jennifer and I had been together for 3 years when we got engaged, 3 years that I thought had been building toward something beautiful and permanent. We'd met at a coffee shop downtown, where she was grading papers because she taught 4th grade at Lincoln Elementary. I complimented her perfectly organized gradebook, and somehow that simple interaction had turned into the relationship I thought would last forever. Our courtship had all the hallmarks of a solid foundation. We shared similar values about family, work, and the kind of future we wanted to build together. Jennifer was intelligent, caring, and had this infectious laugh that could brighten even my worst days on the job site. I worked as a project supervisor for a mid-sized construction company, managing residential developments throughout the metro area. And the unpredictable hours and physical demands of construction work had ended more than one previous relationship. As we got to know each other, Jennifer seemed to understand the realities of my career in ways that other women hadn't. She never complained when I had to work late to meet deadlines, or when weekend emergencies pulled me away from our plans. She'd pack me lunches for long days, text me encouragement during particularly stressful projects, and always seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my work challenges and successes. When I proposed to her on the 3rd anniversary of our first date, at the same coffee shop where we'd met, her tears of joy and immediate yes felt like the confirmation that we were meant to be together. We started planning a wedding for the following spring, choosing a date that would give us plenty of time to organize everything properly while still being soon enough that we wouldn't have to wait forever to start our married life. The engagement period had been everything I'd hoped it would be. We spent hours talking about our future, looking at houses we might buy, discussing how many children we wanted, and where we'd like to raise them. Jennifer threw herself into wedding planning with the same organized enthusiasm she brought to her classroom, creating detailed spreadsheets and timelines that kept every aspect of our celebration on track. We'd made the decision to continue living separately during our engagement, primarily for practical reasons that made sense for both of our situations. Jennifer's house was a small 1-bedroom bungalow in the Riverside district, convenient to her school and perfect for a single person, but too cramped for 2 adults to share comfortably. My apartment was similarly sized, a 1-bedroom unit in a newer complex closer to the downtown construction projects I worked on most frequently. Both of our living situations had been chosen when we were single, optimized for individual convenience rather than couple functionality. Jennifer's commute to her school was only 10 minutes from her house, and she'd built relationships with neighbors who helped her with yard work and minor maintenance tasks that she couldn't handle herself. My apartment was walkable to several of the things I love and had a gym and other amenities that supported my bachelor lifestyle. Rather than forcing one of us to give up a living situation that worked well for our individual needs, we decided to maintain separate residences until after the wedding. This arrangement also had financial benefits, allowing us both to save money on rent and utilities that we could put toward our wedding expenses and the larger place we planned to lease together after we were married. Finding that larger place had become one of the major items on our wedding planning checklist. We'd been looking at 3-bedroom houses with 2-car garages in family-friendly neighborhoods, places where we could grow into a married couple and eventually raise the children we both wanted. The search had been fun, giving us opportunities to envision our life together and make plans for how we'd arrange our combined belongings and create a home that reflected both of our personalities. Our typical routine during the engagement was to split our time between both places, with me spending some weekends at Jennifer's house and her staying at my apartment on the other weekends. This arrangement gave us time together while still maintaining some individual space and independence during our final months as single people. This system had worked well for us throughout most of our engagement, providing the right balance of togetherness and autonomy. But about 4 months before our scheduled wedding date, Jennifer's behavior and availability gradually changed. The changes were subtle at first, easily attributed to increased stress at work or the growing complexity of wedding preparations. Jennifer started declining invitations to spend nights at my apartment, claiming that she had too much schoolwork to do at home alone. Also, she added that arrangements for the wedding are draining. Her explanation seemed reasonable, and I understood that the final months before a wedding could be overwhelming with all the details that needed to be finalized. As time went on, she began canceling some of our weekend plans, saying that she needed to catch up on some unexpected school obligations that had come up and required her attention. Jennifer had always been a dedicated teacher who took her responsibilities seriously, so her need to prioritize work didn't initially seem unusual or concerning. But as these cancellations became more frequent, I started to notice a pattern that troubled me. Jennifer was no longer making the same effort to spend time together that had characterized our relationship throughout the engagement. Instead of finding ways to include me in her schedule or rearranging her obligations to preserve our time together, she seemed to be using work and other commitments as reasons to maintain distance. When I tried to be understanding and supportive, offering to help her with anything she wanted, she would politely decline and insist that she needed to handle everything herself. The collaborative partnership that had defined our relationship was being replaced by a more independent approach that left me feeling excluded from important aspects of her life. The most concerning change was in her communication patterns. Jennifer had always been someone who stayed in regular contact throughout the day, but her messages became less frequent and more perfunctory, lacking the warmth and personality that had always made me look forward to hearing from her. Our phone conversations also became shorter and more focused on practical matters, rather than the personal, intimate discussions that had always been the foundation of our emotional connection. She seemed distracted during our calls, often multitasking or cutting conversations short because she had other things she needed to attend to. After several weeks of this pattern, I began to feel like I was losing touch with the woman I was planning to marry in just a few months. The Jennifer who had been my closest confidant and partner was becoming someone who seemed too busy or preoccupied to maintain the level of connection we had always shared. I tried addressing my concerns directly, asking her if everything was okay and whether the stress of wedding planning or work was affecting her more than she was letting on. But she would dismiss my worries with reassurances that everything was fine and that she was just going through a particularly busy period that would settle down soon. Her explanations might have been more convincing if I hadn't been able to see evidence that contradicted them. Jennifer's social media activity suggested that she was finding time for activities and social events that she hadn't mentioned to me. When I asked her about these outings, she would explain them as work-related gatherings or last-minute invitations from friends that had come up when I wasn't available. But the frequency of these unexplained social activities, combined with her decreased availability for our own plans, created a picture that didn't quite add up. The situation came to a head on a Friday evening, about 3 months before our wedding. I had finished work earlier than expected and decided to surprise Jennifer by showing up at her house with takeout from her favorite restaurant. I thought an unannounced visit might be a romantic way to reconnect. When I arrived at Jennifer's house around 7 o'clock, her car wasn't in the driveway, and the house was dark. I used my key to let myself in, and it was clear that she wasn't home. I called her cell phone to find out when she might be back, planning to wait for her or reschedule our surprise dinner for a better time. When she answered, her voice sounded slightly breathless, and with background noise that suggested she was in a crowded environment. I asked where she was, and she told me that she had to leave town unexpectedly because of a family emergency that had come up that afternoon. She said her aunt in Springfield had been hospitalized and that she had driven there immediately after work to be with her family during the crisis. The explanation seemed plausible, and family emergencies were certainly the kind of thing that could require dropping everything and traveling on short notice. I told her I understood and that I hoped her aunt would be okay. She thanked me for being supportive and said she wasn't sure when she'd be back, but that she would keep me updated on the situation. I said goodbye and ended the call without mentioning that I was currently sitting in her living room. Something about the conversation had felt off in ways I couldn't quite identify, but I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt and assume that the stress of a family crisis was affecting her communication style. But instead of leaving immediately, I found myself staying at Jennifer's house, feeling too lazy to have the long ride through traffic back home. I settled in on her couch with the food I'd brought, thinking I would wait a few hours to see if she called with updates about her aunt's condition. If she were really dealing with a family crisis, she might need emotional support or practical help that I could provide from a distance. As the evening progressed, I ate the food I brought alone, and instead of going home to my own apartment, I decided to stay at Jennifer's house overnight since I didn't have any urgent tasks to handle the next day. And it would be nice to stay and wait for Jennifer. If she was really dealing with a family crisis, I wanted to be there to support her when she got back. If something else was going on in our relationship, I needed to know what it was. I made myself as comfortable as possible on her living room couch, using the blanket she kept on the back of the sofa and trying to get some sleep. The house felt different when she wasn't there, quieter. I dozed fitfully throughout the night, waking periodically to check my phone for messages from Jennifer that never came. By midnight, I was fully awake and increasingly convinced that something was seriously wrong with the story she had told me. If she were really at a hospital with a family member, wouldn't she have sent at least one update about the situation? The hours between midnight and 3 a.m. passed slowly, with me trying to sleep. I kept hoping that she would call with an update like she said. But what happened at 3 o'clock in the morning shattered that hope and revealed a truth that was far worse than anything I had imagined. I heard her key turning in the front door lock, the familiar sound that had always meant Jennifer was coming home. I got up from the couch and walked toward the entryway to welcome her home and find out how her aunt was doing. But when Jennifer saw me standing there in her living room, her face went completely white as she froze like she'd seen a ghost. Her reaction was immediate and unmistakable. She looked like someone who had been caught doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. But before either of us could say anything, a man's voice from somewhere behind her called out, "Babe, who's that?" The voice was casual. That's when I realized that Jennifer hadn't been out of town dealing with a family emergency. She had been out with another man, someone who called her "babe," with a kind of casual intimacy that only comes from a close personal relationship. The woman I was supposed to marry in 4 months had been lying to me about her whereabouts while she was out with someone else. I was speechless, trying to process what I was seeing and hearing while Jennifer stood frozen in her doorway, unable to explain or justify the situation she'd been caught in. The man behind her made it clear that this wasn't an accidental encounter or innocent coincidence. From what I could piece together based on Jennifer's appearance and behavior, they had been out clubbing or at some other nightlife venue. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something more revealing and party-appropriate than her usual conservative style. The man with her was apparently waiting for an introduction or explanation, but Jennifer seemed incapable of providing either. She just stood there looking back and forth between me and whoever was behind her, clearly trying to figure out how to handle a situation she had never expected to be caught in. I realized in that moment that everything about our relationship had been a lie. The woman who had been declining to spend time with me because of work obligations and family commitments had actually been maintaining a secret relationship with someone else. All of her excuses about being too busy or too stressed to maintain our usual level of connection had been covering for the time she was spending with another man. The betrayal was complete and devastating. But what made it even worse was the elaborate deception she had constructed to hide it from me. This wasn't a spontaneous mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a systematic pattern of lying that had been going on for weeks or months, while I had been planning our wedding and building my life around a future that was never going to happen. I couldn't wait for daylight to break. I didn't want to hear her explanations or excuses, didn't want to be drawn into a conversation about what I had discovered or how we might work through it. The evidence of her betrayal was undeniable, and there was nothing she could say that would change what I had witnessed. I gathered my things from around her house and prepared to leave. Jennifer tried to stop me, reaching out as I walked past her toward the door, but I avoided her touch and kept moving toward the exit. As I reached the front door, I could hear her starting to speak, beginning what I assumed would be an attempt to explain or justify what had happened. But I wasn't interested in hearing her version of events or her promises about how she could fix what had been broken. I walked past the man who had been with her, A stranger whose face I didn't recognize, but whose presence told me everything I needed to know about Jennifer's secret life. He looked confused and uncomfortable, apparently not understanding the full scope of what he had walked into or his role in destroying someone else's relationship. I left Jennifer's house that night knowing that our marriage would never happen and that our relationship was over. The woman I had planned to spend my life with had revealed herself to be someone entirely different from the person I thought I knew and loved. In the days that followed, Jennifer made numerous attempts to contact me and explain what had happened. She called constantly, sent long text messages, and even showed up at my apartment and my workplace trying to get me to listen to her side of the story. Her explanations and justifications never made sense, filled with contradictions and half-truths that only reinforced my decision to end our relationship. She claimed that her relationship with the other man wasn't serious, that it was just a friendship that had gotten out of hand, that she had never intended for things to develop the way they had. But the elaborate lie about the family emergency, the months of declining to spend time with me, and the obvious intimacy between her and the man who had called her babe told a different story. This hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment or a friendship that had accidentally crossed boundaries. This had been a deliberate choice to maintain a secret relationship while continuing to plan a wedding with me. Jennifer also tried to minimize the significance of what had happened, suggesting that we could work through this problem, and this wouldn't be an issue after we were married. She promised that she would end her relationship with the other man and dedicate herself completely to rebuilding my trust. But my mind never wavered in its decision to end our engagement. The level of deception required to maintain her double life revealed character flaws that I couldn't overlook or forgive. Someone capable of lying so systematically about something so fundamental wasn't someone I could trust to be faithful and honest in marriage. The practical aspects of ending our engagement were complicated and painful. We had to cancel our wedding venue, notify our guests, return gifts that had already been received, and deal with various vendors who had been hired for our celebration. Each of these tasks was a reminder of the future we had planned together and the dreams that had been destroyed by Jennifer's choices. I also had to figure out what to do with the engagement ring I had retrieved from Jennifer, which had cost me several months' salary and represented my commitment to a relationship that no longer existed. Eventually, I decided to return it to the jewelry store where I had purchased it, using the store credit to buy a nice watch for myself, a reminder that I had dodged a bullet and avoided marrying someone who wasn't the person I thought she was. The emotional recovery from Jennifer's betrayal took much longer than the practical aspects of ending our engagement. Learning that someone you've planned to spend your life with is capable of such elaborate deception creates lasting damage to your ability to trust and form intimate relationships. I began working with a therapist to process what had happened and understand how I had missed the signs of Jennifer's deception during the months when she was maintaining her secret relationship. The counseling helped me realize that her betrayal was a reflection of her character rather than any failure on my part to be a good partner or fiancé. Through therapy, I came to understand that Jennifer's ability to compartmentalize her double life and maintain elaborate lies wasn't something I could have detected or prevented. Someone who is determined to deceive their partner can be incredibly effective at hiding their true behavior, especially when they have legitimate reasons to be away from home or unavailable. The experience taught me important lessons about the difference between normal relationship challenges and fundamental character flaws that can't be overcome through communication or compromise. Jennifer's systematic deception wasn't a problem we could have worked through. It was evidence of a capacity for dishonesty that would have eventually destroyed our marriage even if I hadn't discovered it before the wedding. Looking back on the night when I heard her key in the door at 3 a.m., I'm grateful that the truth was revealed when it was, even though the discovery was devastatingly painful. Living unknowingly married to someone who was maintaining secret relationships would have been far worse than dealing with the immediate heartbreak of ending our engagement. The sound of that key turning in the lock had promised to be the comfortable arrival of someone I loved and trusted. Instead, it became the moment when I learned that the woman I was planning to marry was someone entirely different from the person I thought I knew. Sometimes the most important revelations happen in the space between hearing a key in the lock and discovering who is really standing on the other side of the door. That night, I learned that the person I was planning to marry wasn't the person I thought I had fallen in love with, and that knowledge, however painful, saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life.